When, in February 1945, the town of Goch was attacked by Allied forces as part of Operation Veritable, 2 brigades were involved, each employing very different plans of attack. Goch was a fortified town on the much-vaunted Siegfried Line. It lay in the path of the Allied push from the northwest and the planned bridgehead over the Rhine at Wesel. The town is divided north-south by the River Neers. 44 Lowland Brigade was to attack north of the river, while 153 Highland Brigade was to attack from the northwest, the river forming the boundary. Because of its situation, it was expected that Goch would be as heavily defended as it was fortified. In the days and nights immediately prior to the attack, the town was the target of heavy Allied bombing raids, which reduced many of the buildings to rubble. From aerial photographs taken at the time, it was clear that the first obstacle that the attacking forces would encounter was an outer ring of anti-tank ditches. To 44 Lowland Brigade, attacking from the northeast, these ditches posed a significant problem, particularly those lying in the open ground between the wooded escarpment and the perimeter of the town itself. The brigade plan was for a 2-battalion attack supported by tanks and artillery. Once 8th Battalion, the Royal Scots, and 6th Battalion, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, had secured their objectives, the Royal Scots Fusiliers, as reserve battalion, were to clear the area between them.
We had been fighting with Field Marshal Montgomery's 21 Army Group since June of 1944 and had been used for quite a number of specialist operations, so that we had experience and know-how to a very high level of expertise of assaulting and capturing fortified towns behind anti-tank ditches, minefields, emplacements, entrenchments, pillboxes, which required initially the use of the armour.
HR for the assault on Goch was planned for 1500 hours on the 18th of February 1945. Soon after first light, the commander of 44 Brigade, Brigadier Harry Cumming Bruce, personally reconnoitred one of the 2 main approach roads into the town as far as the 2nd anti-tank ditch. His armoured car drew no enemy fire, and in the belief that the Germans might have been on the point of leaving the town, he decided on a change of plan. Instead of the all-out brigade attack with artillery support, designed to break through the enemy defences before nightfall and enable the establishment of firm bases in the town during the night, A Company, 8th Royal Scots, was ordered to carry out an immediate surprise attack, supported by 2 troops of Churchill tanks along the axis originally planned for the KOSB.
This change of plan gave a tremendous amount of extra work and rethinking to my battalion and myself, because having concentrated the battalion in a certain area, the forward assembly area, assuming we were to carry out the original plan, one isolated infantry company, together with its appropriate armoured bits and pieces, which would have included, amongst other things, the Churchill tanks of the Grenadier Guards, they had to be physically moved over from one flank to another, crossing everybody else's lines of communication, and launched down another axis altogether in order to attempt to bounce the anti-tank ditch and enter the town of Goch by a different route completely to that originally planned for.
On our company commander coming back to tell us this, the tanks arrived, the bridge lane tanks, the gun tanks, and the kangaroos, which we called them, which were Sherman tanks with their turrets off, on which you were to be transported into the town. We travelled down through the town, past houses and various other buildings without any sign of life at all, and eventually the bridge laying tank got to the anti-tank ditch, and we could see it laying its bridge over the ditch. Then there wasn't any further movement, and eventually we realised that the tank couldn't disengage from the bridge, and that just at that time we were fired upon from houses across the ditch, and also from the ditch itself, and the company commander gave us the order to dismount and to take up positions along the ditch, which we did so. And we returned fire. There were Germans coming along the ditch, and we were throwing grenades into the ditch. And for some time we had a problem there because we were trying to dig in at the same time. We didn't want to go into the ditch. That was no good because we had to keep on the top.
And so the infantry had to dismount from their armoured vehicles on our own side of the anti-tank ditch and assault across on foot themselves, thereby establishing a small bridgehead across the anti-tank ditch, so that it could have been accepted as a success to that degree. But on the other hand, they were pinned down there and were not able to enter the actual confines of the town of Goch.
While they're turning the fire on our positions in the top of the anti-tank ditch, the company commander's runner came to tell us that it had been decided that the Germans were still in the town in some force, and that the full-scale attack would be carried out, starting off with the artillery barrage which had been planned, and we happened to be on one of the targets of our own artillery, so we were going to be in for an unhappy time with our own artillery, plus the German small arm fire and the mortar fire. Well, this lasted for quite some time, and funnily enough, the casualties weren't heavy at all there. One or two casualties, but nothing serious at all, which was surprising because the artillery was very heavy. This went on for some time and then it stopped, and we settled down to wait to see what would happen next. The Germans were still firing at us despite the artillery fire, and as we continued to hold on to this position, the Germans were in fact trying to come up the ditch in the anti-tank ditch to get at us, but we kept them off with grenades and with small arms fire. Eventually, as night came on, the KOSB came along down the route that we had come and went over the ditch and down into the town.
They reached the anti-tank ditch and got in easily enough. But getting out was another matter, because they found that the anti-tank ditch was 20 feet deep and just about the same across. They had to dig with their trenching tools and their picks and help piggyback each other up the other side of almost an escarpment to get out. Once they did get out, they quite easily secured the houses that were their objective. We were across the anti-tank ditch and into the first house. We established company headquarters in the cellar of the house. But the German fierce resistance and response to our occupation made us realise that we do more than just sit in the house. The Germans were using machine guns. They were firing their Panzerfausts through the house, hitting the wall of one house, knocking a hole, putting another Panzerfaust through the hole to hit the next wall. And eventually they came through one wall and killed 4 of our men. So we decided we must establish at least 2 sections each side of the house, the houses. We got the sections in position. They had great difficulty digging in because the Germans had laid almost a carpet of barbed wire over the ground on their side of the anti-tank ditch. This was obviously to foul any tank that got across, to foul the tracks. The men had to cut this wire and then dig in. When they eventually did get dug in and used their brands and Piets against the houses the Germans were operating from, things seemed to quieten down. We, in fact, dominated the area then by getting these men out of houses and into slit trenches.
Now, during the hours of darkness, my 3 companies all achieved their objectives and established themselves where planned. These were limited objectives by necessity, as they always are in a night attack, and the plan required their expansion as soon as it was light.
By reverting to the original plan, 44 Brigade had managed, early in the night of the 18th of February, to achieve a bridgehead on the edge of the town in the face of fierce and determined enemy resistance, although the anti-tank ditch and railway line had proved insurmountable obstacles to their tanks and armoured personnel carriers. On the far side of the town, to the south of the River Nears, 153 Highland Brigade went into their attack with the anti-tank ditch already secured by Canadian troops of the Seaforth Highlanders. The brigade plan was simpler than that being used northwest of the river. The 3 battalions involved, 5th Black Watch, 5th 7th Gordon Highlanders and 1st Gordon Highlanders, were to follow one another into the attack. First to go in was to be 5th Battalion, the Black Watch. Their task was to take the eastern part of the town up to the main square. The 5th 7th Gordons were then to leapfrog through the Black Watch positions and take the rest of the town as far as the railway. Finally, the 1st Gordons were to secure the area to the south of the Black Watch 5th 7th boundary.
Now, we went into Goch at nothing 100 hours, and we crossed the start line. And the first thing we came to was the anti-tank ditch, where we found a bridge over that which had been, the territory had been taken by the 2nd Seaforth of 152, and my company headquarters immediately behind the leading platoon, and the 2 other platoons were behind me. Now, the leading platoon, of course, had its point section out in front, but it was in complete control of its platoon commander. And therefore, you couldn't be too far distributed. And then the first thing we came across was that we came across D Company, who, in fact, had made the crossroads just at the entry into the town, and we took a left hook and went into the town. We got complete surprise, and there was no fighting at all. And the first thing to do, of course, was to get to our objective. And always we had very clear objectives to go for. We had obviously looked at them through air photographs and also from recce's tool beforehand. So we knew where we were going to, although of course once one got in, it was strange. I mean, we didn't know, and it was dark, very dark. So we got onto our objective, and after that, of course, having got the objective, one had got to clear up behind.
The 5th Battalion Black Watch had entered Goch in darkness, unopposed. They had reached the main square of the town, and they were in positions along their route into the town. But in the long hours of darkness, and with their numbers depleted by 10 days of almost continual fighting prior to entering Goch, they were unable to carry out any clearing-up operations before the 5th 7th Gordons attempted to pass through them at 0700 hours that same morning, the 19th of February. The 5th 7th Gordons' task was to take the area extending east from the main square to the railway line. But as soon as they moved forward into the square, they were pinned down by sniper fire.
We fought our way towards our objective, which was the town centre that had been the townhouse, and from there I was ordered to move on and enter the houses over a large crater which was bombed by the RAF the night before, a 10,000 pounder. We were lined up on the far side of the crater, and I looked up at a wall, and through a small window I saw a German aiming his rifle at what I took to be my head. However, he killed, and unfortunately he killed my signaller. I threw a grenade through this window, which unfortunately didn't go off. However, we went over a wall and into the house. I heard some machine gun firing, which happened to be Spandau firing rather, up the street that we had to cross. I took a PID bomb and fired 2 bombs into the foundation of a house at the other side of the street. We crossed 1 or 2 at a time, and we finally got into the house through this hole, into the cellars, and unfortunately we found there was no roof in the house, of course, due to the shelling.
The house Lieutenant Manson and his platoon occupied lay only yards beyond the central square. The momentum of the entire 5th 7th Gordons attack was lost, as they were pinned down by the accuracy of the enemy's mortar, Spandau and small arms fire. Meanwhile, 1st Gordons were coming up through the Black Watch positions to advance on their objectives south of the square. Within minutes of coming under fire, 1st Gordons lost the commander of A Company, killed by a sniper.
We were commanded by Martin Lindsay, who was the 2nd Command Acting Commanding Officer. So he came up and said, right, D Company, get going as far as you can. I took my 3 platoon commanders with me to point out the objectives. It was very difficult going because there was rubble all around the place. We couldn't get tank support. First of all, they weren't right there. Secondly, they couldn't move and the grounds were all cratered. We got so far up towards our objective, came under Spandau fire, sniper fire, and enfilade. We jumped into a doorway, which could just take 4 of us, and my young officer, first action, he dropped, but he wasn't killed, but he was stunned, grazed by a bullet. We managed to clamber through the back, over some more rubble, and more by luck and good judgment, got back to our attack headquarters.
A and D Company's attack down the road leading from the main square was held up throughout the rest of the day by enemy troops occupying strong points on both sides of the road. Tank support was impossible because of the cratering and rubble, much of which had been caused by Allied bombing. The only tank to venture into the main street was destroyed and its crew killed. To overcome this impasse, 1st Gordon's acting CO, Colonel Martin Lindsay, brought his remaining 2 companies, B and C, into the attack from the cover of some houses on the right flank of the men pinned down in the main street. The big advantage of this move was that the streets were relatively clear, opening up the possibility of close tank support.
There was a tremendous amount of sniping, and we had just to force our way through and avoid as far as possible the snipers, because there is no doubt about it, it was a delaying action. The whole of Goch, it was just held by snipers up in towers and the top of buildings, and as soon as you knocked one out, then another one seemed to take its place. And there were really dedicated guys who were there just to die, shoot and die. And as most of them, an awful lot of them did, I mean, we called down artillery fire onto, if it was a steeple, and knocked that down, which they did very successfully. And it was just a matter of, as far as I was concerned, when C Company took their objective, then we went through, leapfrogging through C Company. And we had the support of tanks and smoke, and the gunners put down smoke. And that did help, because it was during the day.
By late afternoon on the 19th of February, while the 5th, 7th Gordons and 2 companies of the 1st Gordons remained pinned down in the vicinity of the main square, B Company, 1st Gordons, had managed to take its objective, a schoolhouse and the buildings surrounding the adjacent road junction, with few casualties. To the north of the river, that same day had begun with 44 Lowland Brigade facing the problem of getting its armour across the anti-tank ditches and into the town to support 8th Royal Scots and 6th King's Own Scottish Borderers in their task of consolidating the footholds they had gained during the night.
I remember very clearly, personally, having a conference with the tank commander and deciding that together, on foot, we should find, if it was possible, to get the tanks into Goch along the existing railway line, starting along it a little way north of the anti-tank ditch. This we managed to do despite the awful weather, and of course there was no light. We were on unknown ground. The railway might have been mined, mercifully it wasn't, and everything went successfully, so that as soon as dawn broke, the companies occupying their objectives in Goch were married up with their supporting Churchill tanks.
The old factory area of Goch still stands, much as it did in 1945. Throughout the night of the 18th of February, the enemy had pinned down D Company of the 8th Royal Scots in the adjacent marshalling yard. But with the arrival of the tanks, the resistance from these buildings was short-lived. And by midday on the 19th, the whole of the 8th Battalion sector had been cleared.
But also mention must be made of the tremendous support that was given them by the use of flame, both from the larger tank crocodiles, as they were called, and their own infantry, smaller flamethrowers mounted in Bren carriers, known as wasps. Without these, there is no question in my mind that the surrender of so many hundreds of prisoners would not have been nearly so effective or quick.
For 6th KOSB, first light on the 19th of February had meant the end of a long and uncomfortable night holding positions in and around houses on the extreme edge of the town.
When first light came, in fact, the tanks were able to come right up across the anti-tank ditch. They fired only 2 shots, and the Germans surrendered. 25 at least burly paratroops just gave themselves up and were completely demoralised. Demoralised, but still arrogant. They were telling us that they wouldn't be prisoners of war very long. The war would be finished in May, and Germany would be the victor.
We had an area roughly about 400 yards deep by 400 yards wide. It was full of... Some houses were intact, most of them were in rubble. It took us roughly 5 hours to cover all that ground. You couldn't afford to let up for one single moment. The reluctance of the troops to go forward was very obvious. The rubble was difficult to move over. The houses were derelict from the outside anyway. And as they moved along each side, the platoons themselves had to have a base. So they got 3 sections each platoon, so that one section covered the others as they went into each house that was possible to get into. The thing that really boosted us on this little operation was the fact that we knew exactly how far we had to go. We had to clear down to the river, and that was it. We couldn't cross over the river. There was no question about that. We knew that within a matter of hours, the 51st Highland Division, they were going to come across the other side of the river and clear our front. So really, that probably helped the very weary and few troops to make it down to the last line of houses before the river.
By last light on the 19th of February, a little over 24 hours after their main attack was launched, 44 Lowland Brigade had achieved their objective. The town north of the River Nears was firmly in their control. One of the key factors which contributed to their success was the all-arms mix that the brigade had evolved as a direct result of their prior experience in attacking heavily defended towns both in northern Germany and in Holland. The technique they used of break-in, seizure of precise objectives, and establishment of firm bases was ideally suited to the night attack, followed by a thorough clear-up operation in daylight with close armoured support. Working to their advantage was the fact that the area to the north of the river was, in the main, less heavily bombed and therefore more accessible to tanks than was the area to the south of the river, where 153 Highland Brigade took a further 24 hours to break the back of a determined enemy resistance.
The streets were all cratered really badly. The street, at least we were going up. Houses, shops on either side. The frontage were standing in a lot, but the backs were complete rubble. And that made movement of infantry very difficult, and movement of tanks well nigh impossible, because tanks of sitting targets were going up a street once they stopped, particularly you've got a determined enemy. And the Germans were, they were determined, but probably not a lot of them, but they've had to hold the place for so long, obviously, and of course in light of events we know they did hold on as long as possible. In the light of what happened overall in Goch for the brigade, a tremendous number of lessons were learned. We learned lessons. In other words, the main lesson is you don't commit too many troops at once. You don't move to the first lot of troops have made good their ground, consolidated. And, in other words, leapfrog through, that's the whole idea, which I think, it's only my own personal opinion, didn't work at Goch. Purely because just one of these things, the enemy just sprout up again. Not a lot at that time. I believe the Germans did put in some reinforcement, but from one Gordon's point of view, the main reinforcement seemed to be on the outside of the town.
The reinforcements to which Colonel Petrie refers were located in Thomashof, a scattering of farm buildings separated from the southern perimeter of the town by several hundred yards of open ground. A Company of the 1st Gordons had been ordered to take Thomashof at first light on the 20th of February, having crossed the open ground under cover of darkness. The first buildings they encountered were taken successfully, but a large number of Germans were well dug in around the other buildings, and a fierce firefight ensued in which A Company was overrun. B Company in turn mounted a daylight attack. Despite tank support, they lost 10 men who were killed crossing the open ground under very heavy and accurate enemy fire from what had been A Company's position. Prior to this costly but successful action, B Company's casualties had been comparatively light.
Even though our cover was in cellars mainly and in buildings of some sort, to have this going on constantly all day or night, it saps the energy from the individual. I mean, there is nothing better than a keen soldier, fit, ready to go and put his will into an attack, which they are, but under continuous barrage, it saps your energy and you see the stuff crumping down round about you, and there's no really will to go out and expose yourself. And the main thing is one that does delay an attack, because sometimes you can't leave the building and you can only go between barrages and clumps of mortar fire. Otherwise, your casualties are too great.
During the battle for Goch, 153 Highland Brigades suffered 3 times as many casualties as 44 Lowland Brigade. Certainly, 153 Brigade faced the more difficult task south of the river, attacking into the heart of the town. But also their plan of attack was flawed, because it depended on one battalion securing ground through which others had to pass in order to take theirs. Such a plan is unsuited to most fibua situations and is almost impossible to achieve in a night attack. Fibua at night poses a number of problems, though it can offer certain advantages to an attacking force. 44 Brigade's plan involved 2 battalions in an initial break-in phase with the establishment of firm bases on well-defined objectives. Because the objectives were limited, they could be achieved by night. The clear-up phase had to be carried out in daylight, and its success owed much to the all-arms support which individual company commanders were able to call upon. Goch was bombed heavily prior to the attack. The resultant cratering and rubble seriously hampered the effective use of tanks in much of the town. Flame proved to be a highly effective weapon on the rare occasions that it could be used in support of the infantry. Accurate and effective artillery support is difficult to achieve in fibua because of the proximity of opposing forces, but the continual bombardment of enemy positions was a significant factor in sapping the morale of those subjected to it. In all 3 actions, Calais, Ortona and Goch, the tank proved a highly effective but highly vulnerable weapon in close support, and its use was limited. In Calais, the Germans were overcautious in exploiting their tank superiority. In Ortona, the deliberate rubbling of streets by the defenders seriously impeded tank movement. In Goch, Allied bombing raids prior to the attack had much the same effect. An important factor in all urban fighting is the vertical dimension. Snipers took a heavy toll of the attacking forces in Calais, Ortona and Goch. In Ortona, the Canadians achieved their breakthrough by mouse-holing through the upper stories of buildings when movement in the open was impossible. Calais was defended with great courage, but without either the resources or the all-arms support to do the job. Fibua, whether in defense or attack, is expensive in terms of manpower, equipment and resources. In Calais, the presence of the civilian population and many hundreds of refugees added significantly to the complexity of the situation. The The high density of buildings in towns imposes short fields of fire, makes mutual support difficult, and often creates problems in communication. In all three examples, confusion and the fog of war were constant factors which can be expected in any fibua action, making tight control essential. Since the end of the Second World War, fighting in built-up areas has been an increasingly significant factor in almost every conflict. The lessons of yesterday remain valid today. The importance of thorough training in all aspects of fibua, of having the correct equipment, of the use of all arms grouping, and of the need for bold leadership at all levels.